The 1965 championship game was Jim Brown's last game as a Brown when the Browns lost to the Green Bay Packers.
The man who replaced Paul Brown in Cleveland and became the second head coach of the Browns was Blanton Collier. He has Hall of Fame credentials himself, not only with his record, but in the way he led the Browns.
What I appreciate from Blanton Collier was his analytical approach and cerebral approach to the game. You learn that there's more to the game from the shoulders up than one ever perceives before. And if a player can learn to combine his great physical assets or gifts, if you will, and then open the envelope of the mental aspect of this game, then he can become a great player.
But when I came to the Browns, I never forget Blanton took me aside on more than one occasion after maybe I had bad coverage on a particular play, and he would literally walk me through the technique and try to get it fixed in your mind so that obviously you wouldn't make the same mistake again.
Blanton was the ultimate teacher. I mean, he was the guy that you could take, anything, and he'd find a way to understand it, and he'd find a way to communicate it. And I think, for a coach to be able to communicate something to a player to the point that you're on the same page and your understanding is the same is, an important ingredient.
We are now joined by one of the key players on Blanton Collier's Browns team. Four-time Pro Bowl player with the Browns, member of the College Football Hall of Fame, Jim Houston. Pleasure to see you.
It's a pleasure to be here.
What made it so special coming to the Cleveland Browns out of Ohio State, out of Massillon for you? You hit the trifecta of Northeast Ohio football between Massillon, Ohio State, and the Browns. What made it so special, Jim?
Well, what was special was in 1946, I sat in the end zone and looked out and wondered what it would take to ever get there. And then my dreams came true. I came in 1960 as first draft choice for Cleveland and played for 13 years. And in one of those years, we were the champions.
When you joined the team in 1960, I would think it would have been a very interesting experience because Paul Brown was the head coach who had coached your brother at Massillon and at Ohio State and with the Browns, and now you were getting a chance to play for the same guy.
It was a privilege. It really was a privilege. And that's the way I looked at it, because here was the greatest coach in football, and I had a chance. And he thought enough of me, probably because of Lynn, that he took me first.
It's quite an honor.
Yeah, it was.
You mentioned the championship, 1964. You beat the Baltimore Colts to win the NFL championship. What was that like for you as a young player on a great team winning a championship?
Well, it wasn't quite that young, but
let's
it was
give you
my
credit.
fifth year. The greatest thing about it was the interaction of all the players. And if any organization can get that interaction, they'll be successful. Paul Wiggin was playing right in front of me as a defensive end. I was the outside linebacker. And I knew that in all defensive calls, he was going to protect me. And then he knew that I was going to support him. And that's the way it was with all the guys. Vince Costello, middle linebacker. Galen Fisk, the right outside linebacker. All these guys knew that their partner, the guy who was in front of them or near them, would carry out the assignments to the nth degree.
One of your former teammates is up for the Hall of Fame this year, Gene Hickerson. Your thoughts on his candidacy and why you think he might belong?
He should have been in there a long time ago. I don't understand the process quite yet, but Gene was an outstanding guard. He was all pro, six or seven times, and in the Pro Bowl, and he was a great guard. He really was a great guard. 260, 6'3", 6'3 and a half, something like that, and he'd take on anybody, and he did take on everybody.
It's a pleasure to see you.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Jim Houston, Browns linebacker. When we come back, a look into the 1970s and a very historic event that happened at Cleveland Browns Stadium, or the old Cleveland Municipal Stadium, as the case may be.
Cleveland hosted the first Monday night game in television history.
Nobody wanted to play it, fearful that it would die at the gate. And I said, let me take a chance in Cleveland. Just give me the Jets, because of the New York audience. And we had the largest crowd in Browns history. It was a very, very dramatic night.
The pulse-pounding drama included Homer Jones' 94-yard kickoff return of the second half kickoff. In a game in which the stellar attraction was Joe Namath, the biggest play was a game-saving interception by linebacker Billy Andrews. A record crowd of nearly 86,000 and a national TV audience of millions witnessed Andrews' greatest moments.
Playing against Joe Namath was a great treat for me, you know, and then to take the pass, pick it up, and run it in for a touchdown on Monday Night Football, it had a tremendous meaning to me.
To pick Terry Bradshaw up like that and slam him down, I think is one of the seminal moments in Brown's history.
Trying to get Turkey Joe into Pittsburgh, you know, like trying to get the president in there. Because they wanted Joe Turkey Jones bad.
Welcome back to 60 years of the Cleveland Browns. With the 1970s, the Browns moved into the same division as the Pittsburgh Steelers. And what was a geographic rivalry became a football rivalry. And nothing symbolized that more than this game and this play.
The next Sunday, the turnaround began in front of over 76,000 fans in a rematch with Pittsburgh. Don Cockcroft booted 4 long field goals to lead the offense. Cleveland needed every point it could get because, typical of a Brown-Steeler brawl, they had lost their quarterback early. Brian Sipe went out with a concussion, and an unknown third-string quarterback and part-time dentist, Dave Mays, took over the controls. Thrown into his first NFL game, Dr. Dave led the Browns to their only touchdown of the game. It held up because the Browns' much-maligned pass rush tore through the Steeler forward wall and sacked Terry Bradshaw 4 times. The ferocity of their charge was symbolized by Joe Jones and this one memorable play. It sealed Pittsburgh's doom on a day Cleveland beat their arch rivals with only a single touchdown and a third-string quarterback in command.
Yeah, Joe, yeah. About time. You know, the passion, the fire. Let's get in their faces. The street fight, which is always what it was. And, you know, Joe was from the street, and I knew he wasn't afraid to go in there and do what he had to do. And to pick Terry Bradshaw up like that and slam him down, I think is one of the seminal moments in Brown's history, because no matter how far away that picture and that play gets, you'll always see Joe Turkey Jones slamming down Terry Bradshaw. And I think from then on, it was on between the Browns and the Steelers. For the rest of that time, there was always animosity. Bradshaw was a big, strong quarterback. Turkey, you know, grabbed him. Crowd's cheering. You don't hear a whistle. I mean, and you know, he's squirming like a fish on a hook, and Turkey just slammed him down. You know, you thought for a minute the guy might have broke his neck, and at that point in time, you know, they didn't have the X-ray units in the stadium, but they wanted the doctors to examine Bradshaw, so they brought him in our locker room in the back, and I remember going in after the game was over and seeing if the guy was okay. You know, at that point in time, he still had no clue what, you know, state or country he was in. You know, for all he knew, he was in La La Land.
Terry Bradshaw was a very strong individual who broke a lot of tackles and made a lot of late runs. He wasn't a guy that just went down, you know, because he didn't want to get hit. And, you know, Turkey, in fairness to him, when he wrapped him up, whistle hadn't blown, he was going to take him down. And he did it in a manner that looked pretty bad and was pretty bad, but at the same time, whistle hadn't blown, and he was doing what he was taught to do.
I don't think Turkey was trying to hurt Terry Bradshaw. It was just the way he threw him over his shoulder. I mean, he was probably hoping it might be down on his back rather than on his head. So I don't think it was anything that Joe did intentionally, even though Joe had all kind of threats afterwards, you know, from Pittsburgh We couldn't take Joe to Pittsburgh with us.
On this particular play, he just made sure that he had Bradshaw, and he dunked him on his head. And he put him out the game. And after the game, you know, he comes in and everybody high-five with him and all that. He comes over to me and I said, Joe, I said, you might be in trouble. He said, what do you mean? I said, man, Bradshaw could die. That's involuntary manslaughter. This is beyond football. You could go to jail. He said, really? I said, you need to go over, don't take nothing off, and see about Bradshaw. At least make it look like you give a damn. He said, okay. And he went over. And when he came back, I said, man, hey, you in Cleveland, man.
Joining us next, the player whose play covered 2 decades and whose association with the Browns is now closing in on 4 decades, and that's a club record, Doug Deacon.
In 1963, the Browns were in Dallas to play the Cowboys when Paul Wiggins shot these never-before-seen home movies of the team, boarding the bus to Saturday practice. Practice was in a public park, but it didn't stop the Browns from winning the next day. He played in 203 consecutive games. Yes, that's 203 games. I announced them all, and I still didn't see any holding calls.
Welcome back to 60 years of the Cleveland Browns. We are very happy to be joined by the man who never missed a game in 14 seasons as a member of the Browns. Holds the consecutive games played record at 203, consecutive starts at 194. Offensive tackle Doug Deacon. Doug, a pleasure. Thank you for being with us.
Well, nice to be here.
You came out of Illinois as a tight end, which is an interesting thing. Drafted in the 6th round by the Browns as an offensive tackle. What were you thinking when you were drafted as an offensive tackle, Doug, a position you had never played?
Well, coming out of Illinois, unfortunately, we were on probation all 4 years that I was there. I was too late for the money there and too early for the money in the NFL.
That didn't work out too well.
No, it didn't. But the only really scout that I ever remember coming by and watching me at practice was a guy named Lou Groza. And it turned out I became the 3rd left tackle in the history and replacing Dick Shafrath, who had replaced Lou. And I got to the Browns, and I had hoped that they were going to give me a shot at tight end. Unfortunately, they gave me a number that had the first digit 7, and I knew I was in trouble. And during the exhibition season back then, you know, you played the exhibition season to get in shape. And so I probably played 3/4 of the 6 exhibition games, and then actually they waived me. The Browns waived me prior to the last 2. And Miami claimed me, and the Browns withdrew the waiver thing, and they brought me back, and they put me on the cab squad for the last 2 exhibition games. And then when the regular season started, they put me on the active roster with the idea that I was a better special teams player than Paul Staroba, who they had drafted in the 3rd round. And I was basically a special teams player. Then about the 6th or 7th game of the season, Bob McKay, the right tackle, went down, and so they put me in at right tackle. And I had basically, I think, 3/4 of experience playing tackle in my life, and I got into the huddle, and you know, I get to see Leroy Kelly and Gary Collins and Gene Hickerson and Bill Nelson, you know, the great, you know, Browns of the championship season. And then I looked, I got to the line of scrimmage and was Claude Humphrey, and I thought, oh boy, nice. This is going to be a rough one. So I guess I did well enough that a couple weeks later, Ray Prohaska, who was then the offensive line coach, said, hey, kid, we're going to start you next week. And I said, who, me? And that was it. So, you know, a lot of, I think, sports is about your athletic ability, and a lot of it's about luck. And I was just lucky that Dick Shafrath, the year prior, had run from Worcester to Cleveland to get a free car, and so when he got to training camp, he had no legs left. And also, I guess I was lucky that the Browns traded Epi Barney to the Chicago Bears for a 6th-round draft pick that happened to be me.
Doug, it was during your time with the team, actually from the beginning, I think, where the Steeler rivalry really became a big deal to the fans in Cleveland and to both franchises. How did that evolve?
Well, I think, you know, for so long, the Browns owned the Steelers. And then all of a sudden, when they got Bradshaw, they got Joe Green, they got Jack Lambert, they got a nucleus on defense. And if you look at the 11 guys that started on that Steel Curtain defense, I think 10 of them went to the Pro Bowl at one time or another. And we had basically the same core of people on offense. The offensive line started with Barry Darrow and then Cody Risen at right tackle. Then you had Henry Shepard at right guard. You had DeLeon and DeMarco at center. You had Robert Jackson and Hickerson at left guard, and myself at left tackle. Well, when you play against the same group of guys for a period of time, and all of a sudden those guys become king of the mountain because they win their 4 Super Bowls, there's a little animosity. And you know, you look at the Steelers press guide, and you read these things since 1970. Well, hey, the Steelers were before 1970. They like to forget that part of it. But you know, it was just the games were physical.
What do you think about the 2007 Browns? What needs to happen?
Well, I think, you know, one of the things that needs to happen is we need to get a little bit more athletic in the offensive line. I think the fact that we don't run a lot of screens and sweeps is indication that we're kind of locked into a center of the field or wherever the hash marks are in regards to where the ball is. I think we need to get some stability at the quarterback position. Find the guy that's going to be our quarterback and find an offense that works for him. I think we've got to get more production out of our running back. On the defensive side, I think we probably need to get some youth in our defensive line. And in the secondary, we need to find that corner to go opposite of Lee Bowden because, you know, we've spent a lot of money in free agency and we've got a lot of bad luck in free agency between Gary Baxter and LaCharles Bentley. If you have those two people, then it's a different story. But unfortunately, you know, like I think we started when we were talking, there's a lot of skill and athletic ability that is involved in sports, but luck is also a big key.
A pleasure.
Always.
Thank you for your work on the field and off for the Cleveland Browns.
Thank you.
Deke's Cardiac Kids were coached by Sam Ratigliano, and he joins us next on the Browns at 60.
The Cardiac Kid games happened because you had a guy playing quarterback that wasn't afraid to take a chance and having the utmost confidence in the players that were around him.
Baby-faced Brian was abetted by the most prolific trio of receivers in the league. With Rutger, Newsom, and Logan, Sipe is like a gourmet at a feast. He can pick and choose, and everything is good. 3 pairs of the surest hands in football.
The 1970s weren't just about the Pittsburgh Steelers. They were also about the Paul Brown-led Cincinnati Bengals. When Brian Sipe and company came from behind to beat the Bengals in Cincinnati and put themselves in position for the playoffs, there was a greeting waiting for the Browns at the airport, not seen for a pope or a president, but the folks were there for the Browns.
We'd gone down to Houston, and we had won down there. And at that point, we used to fly into the Hopkins Airport to the terminal. And there were so many people in the airport waiting for us that, you know, some of the tiles were melting from the body heat. And I mean, it was a major league zoo. But then we lose the Hail Mary game up in Minnesota. So, you know, it's either go down to Cincinnati and win or go home.
The night that we beat Cincinnati and we were coming home and we had won the division and, you know, we couldn't land in the jetway and the plane pulled over and there was then the mayor Voinovich at the bottom.
Comeback City, and we are going to be #1.
There was so many people at the airport. You could not get down the hallway. I mean, there's people standing on phones, and you know, phones are falling. I mean, it was very scary because there were so many people. And fortunately, they were smart enough to try to find our wives, and you know, I mean, we couldn't find anybody. I mean, the entire airport was wall-to-wall people.
It was a madhouse. Nobody expected it. You know, we expected to win the game. You know, maybe have family there, maybe a few other people at the airport, you know, to pick you up. It was a mob. They must have had, this is no joke, 25,000 people were lined up at the airport. They had to reroute us off the airplane to buses to get to our own cars. We couldn't even get to our own cars because there were so many people in those parking lots and at the airport. It was unreal.
Just people everywhere. You think the president landed. And then to a lot of the people, we were like the president.
Just the ride, the experience amongst the teammates and with the fans, the bonding with them was unique and something that, you know, that was the greatest memory. It was a great year for us and the fans.
We are very happy to be joined now by the man who was the lightning rod for all of that excitement, head coach Sam Rutigliano. Sam, thanks for being with us.
I don't know about that lightning rod, but I'm glad to be here.
Have you ever seen anything throughout your career, since your career, that matched the excitement of that Cardiac Kids era?
No, and to think, you know, that the Cleveland Browns are the flagship of the fleet, but that year was just absolutely unbelievable. Sometimes when I think about having been there and done that, it seems unreal.
It was a wonderful time.
Right.
Tough decisions in coaching often pay future dividends. You had some tough decisions to make as head coach of the Browns. What do you think were your toughest decisions?
Well, I think probably the toughest decision I made was initially coming here for the interview. You know, Peter Hadhazy was an assistant general manager at the New England Patriots, and he was the guy that talked Art Modell in getting me an interview. The hardest decision is what you're seeing in pro football today. Peter Hadhazy and Art were discussing the previous staff, which was a lot of good people that Forrest Gregg had here. And they were going back and forth, and Pat Modell says, well, wait a minute now. Wait a minute. You're here to be the coach. Let's hear what you have to say. And Art said, that's right. What do you think about this? And I said, well,
said that.
Pat, that's exactly right. And I had a list, which I had done. And I said to Art Modell, and I thought about it for about 10 seconds because it probably could have lost me the opportunity. I said, Art, with the commonality of a 160-hour week with coaches, and having been with 4 coaches for 11 years, and 2 of those situations, they threw hand grenades and blew up the room, and we all got fired. If you have any idea to mandate a staff, then I don't want the job, because I want to select every single coach on this staff.
Wow.
I want, with your approval, I want you to be involved in the interview, but I must do that. And you're seeing what's going on. There's a couple of hand grenades that have been blown up this year.
Why is this fan base so passionate about the team, Sam, and the people who played for and coached the team?
Well, I think that the number one, obviously, we had a lot of success, and it was a very, you know, it was a very exciting team. In 1980, 13 of the 16 games were decided in the final 2 minutes, and we all know the history of the Cardiac Kids. Then the other thing, I think, I really have been part of the community in so many areas. I mean, I could speak 365 days a night. I'm talking about churches, high schools, coaches, and I think people, just like the show that we do, they know that I know they want answers, and they don't want any answers but the truth. And I think that's probably, it's been a good chemistry for me, and I'm really happy about that and very fortunate.
A pleasure, sir.
Well, thank you.
A pleasure back then and a pleasure now.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here.
When we return, we will take a look at that play that will forever live in infamy in the city of Cleveland, Ohio. Seems like it was in front of about 250,000 people now at the stadium, plus the viewpoint of a man who was on the field, wide receiver Reggie Rucker. Welcome back to 60 Years of the Cleveland Browns. I'm Jeff Phelps. Still coming up on the show, Reggie Rucker, Brian Brennan, and Mike Pagel. When the Oakland Raiders came to Cleveland on that very memorable winter day in 1981, the Browns were favorites. Forget the Ice Bowl. With the snow and the wind at the stadium that day, this game felt like the Arctic Bowl, which didn't help the pain that followed.
The stadium may be new, but on a day like today, 26 years ago, the play was called Red Right 88. As the Browns celebrate their 60th anniversary, we remember the game and the play, Red Right 88.
The roar in that stadium was tantamount to jet engines, and it was just pulsating as we were on that drive. And it was another Cardiac Kid drive with the script already set there for us, time running out, all the weapons out there.
We had missed 3 field goals. We had missed an extra point. It was not a chip shot because we were kicking into the lake, and it was unbelievable that day, minus 29 wind chill factor.
I had kicked all year with torn cartilage in my left knee and 2 herniated discs, and you know, I was far from 100%. I think that weighed heavily on Sam's decision. I'd missed earlier in the game.
Brian and I had talked about it. We're going to run the ball on 1st down and 3rd down. On 3rd down, we'll run the ball so that we keep the clock going. So they got to do one of 2 things.
They got to, at that point, the clock would probably be at less than a minute. They got to give up that last timeout or let the clock run down to 35 or 40 seconds. But we're not going out of here without having the opportunity to throw the ball. We're going to throw the ball on second down, because if we throw an incompleted pass, the clock will stop, but we'll get it going on third down. That was the plan.
I said, Brian, whatever you do, get it on the right hash mark.
What they call Red Right 88, I'm thinking, oh man, that's a chance. But I didn't want to think about it because, again, sometimes you live by and you die by.
It was a play that Dave was going to come from the other side underneath, and we were going to put up what we call a pick for him. And it was going to just give Dave a chance just to run away from Dwayne Osteen. If someone got a quick release off the ball clean, then you became a viable player, and that's what happened. I beat Mike cleanly off the ball. Now I attract Brian's attention, and he did what he had done 900 other times. He just said, okay, now that's my read. Take it to Ozzie, don't wait for Dave to come underneath, and that's what they did. The ball held up in the wind, and Mike is fighting for his life to get back and looked up and made the interception.
The thing I guess you remember the most is when the ball was intercepted by Mike Davis, how quiet it got. I mean, it was like, you know, it was just somebody turned a switch and boom, you know, there was no noise whatsoever.
Joining us now, a few years later, and without the hat, wide receiver Reggie Rucker. Reggie, a pleasure. Welcome.
Nice to see you, Jeff.
You've always been a very opinionated guy. You made your career being an opinionated guy after you left pro football. When you came to the Browns, you and Brian Sipe, how did that mesh?
Not too well.
At least at first.
Yeah, at first, to set that up, I came from New England, and I had Jim Plunkett throwing to me. And there wasn't anything that I couldn't run that Plunkett couldn't throw. And when I came here, this franchise was at a low point. They hadn't won very many games. There was a coaching change. Forrest Gregg was now the head coach. But Art Modell called me and talked to me on the phone. He told me that they had made the trade, and he said, I want to bring you here. We're going to throw lots of passes to you. And working with Brian Sipe, he was different. He wasn't the prototypical quarterback. He didn't have the big arm. He didn't have the big size. And it was too early at that point for me in our relationship to recognize how smart this guy was, how cool he would be under pressure, and how charismatic he would be, and all of those things, leadership. And those, because I think some of that is forgotten about today in terms of being a quarterback. And as we went on and the relationship grew, I learned that, wow, there's more to quarterbacking than just having a great arm. Because if there are so many guys that are not in this league today who had great arms but didn't have anything up here. And one of the things you have to know about the Sam Rutigliano era is that when he came in, and I think this was probably more for Brian Sipe than anybody else, he told us all that when you get to this level, almost everybody has the same skill.
How about the passion of Browns fans? You saw it as a player. You see it now as a resident of the city.
It's these really and truly are some of the very best fans in all of sports. Now, I grew up in Washington, D.C. If you've ever been to Washington, D.C., the Redskin fan is incredible. I mean, they really are. And this fan here, the Browns fan, rivals and beats that because of what they did, what they showed the National Football League and the world when the team left here, that they were just that committed to this particular football team. Because you see, there are other things in other cities, but in Cleveland, and I know Cavs fans will say, yeah, we got LeBron James, but LeBron just got here.
He did just get here.
Yeah, he just got here. This has been, and I don't care, you know, you can have 5 LeBron Jameses, you can have all the baseball players you want. This is the soul of a community, the Cleveland Browns. It's deeply rooted in what you do here, how you grow up, what you were watching, the power and the strategy and the sheer will that is playing football. It's just you against me and this talent that we have. And there's so many games going on in the big overall chess match that even the casual fan has to become an obsessive fan once you get identified and connected to this sport. And the Cleveland Browns, when you came here, you recognize that this is the sport. This is the game. This is the home of pro football, the Hall of Fame down the road in Canton. This is where it began. And so you're playing in the bedrock of what the game of football is all about.
Pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you.
And a pleasure to watch you on the field.
Yeah, enjoyed it. Thank you.
Browns wide receiver Reggie Rucker. Reggie mentioned his teammate Ozzie Newsome. When we come back, why Ozzie Newsome remains so special to all of his former teammates and to all of us.
He was always there for us, and when we needed, a big play, 10, 15 yards, they always went to Ozzie.